Hello there, friends, and welcome back to Axie Tuesday. Today, we've got an exciting episode, something a little bit different, a community member that you might not recognize and that you've probably never heard of, but one that I'm excited to introduce. We've got Keith Comito with us. He's someone that's been watching the Axie space for a while. He's someone that is really focused on health and wellness, and I'm excited to dive a little deeper. Keith, first and foremost, welcome to the show. How are you doing, man?
Great. Thanks for having me. Busy days like a lot of other people, but doing all right.
Yeah, awesome. I'm glad to hear it. So maybe I'm sure you can give us an intro better than I can. So maybe you could give us just a quick elevator pitch of what you're all about and why you're here on Axie Tuesday today.
Sure. So you had mentioned health. So that is basically, I'm the president of a nonprofit organization called Lifespan.io, which raises funds and awareness for research aimed at extending healthy human lifespan, which is actually a cause that is important to many blockchain technology pioneers from the past to the present. People like Hal Finney all the way through to Vitalik Buterin.
Mm.
And I also spearhead some research projects for Disney. So I'm kind of all over the place, although I'm not sure how much I could talk about that. But the way that I kind of got introduced into the Axie community is there's this budding movement for decentralized science, right? Adding the power of blockchain to improve science. And through all the DAOs that are emerging, I had crossed paths with Jiho, and Jiho had the biology interest in his background. I believe he used to collect bugs and that sort of thing, so that we kind of got together and looped together. And then I've been kind of ping-ponging around the Axie community members talking about this technology and the ways in which games like Axie Infinity might be able to incorporate certain kind of biometric technologies into them to add like exciting features. So that's kind of,
Interesting.
yeah.
Wow, that's super cool. On a really high level, I do love the idea of thinking about time as a resource, just like anything else. We spend a lot of time thinking about money and finances as resources. We think about other like natural resources and precious metals and things like that that are very aesthetic and visually pleasing. But time really is that ultimate resource. And when you think about investing, often time is the element that we're all trying to battle against. And it kind of makes sense to me. As you mentioned, like people like Vitalik, they are, is super ager the appropriate word that you can apply to people like that are, I guess the goal is to live as long and as healthily for as long as possible, right? Is that the general premise?
You're framing it very well, because one of the confusions that some people might have when you hear like terms like life extension is, oh, you might think in your mind like being hooked up to machines and like that being protracted for a long period of time. But to your point, what obviously you would want is the period of health and youth to be extended. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right with that framing, and finding the right language there is actually one of sort of the key things that we've been sort of wrestling with as a community. Because you might say, if you say something like health span, that might be accurate to what we're talking about, but some people might feel that's a little bit too cautious, right? When you really want to inspire people by saying, hey, some people are out there and they want to live much longer, so don't be shy about that. So it's kind of like a balance. How do you strike that?
Yeah, totally. And I love this concept as well, because I wrote a blog about the future of guilds and Axie Infinity. And part of it was angled at using guilds as a funnel to, or scholarships also as a funnel to identify outstanding learners, people with a high aptitude that want to apply that into something, and then, turning that energy into either a skill or an output so that that person can benefit by having a new skill that they can maximize, and the global economy benefits by having, one more creative or person that can help produce things. The end goal, I think, for this whole thing was never for all of us to just be sitting around playing video games all day and not doing anything else, right? Like the play to earn or play and earn revolution, I think that was the disruption point, using gaming as a platform to fill in the gap and kind of show what can be possible with these economies. But that was really the starting point to me, not the ending point, right? That's what breaks it open. And now that we've got this time and this new abundance of financial resources, let's call it, well, now what do we do with our time resources, right? What does this unlock for us? And I'm seeing more and more as I talk to folks that have become successful in crypto. It's sometimes just about getting a day-to-day routine down, doing things that make you happy and satisfied just in your daily life, in terms of cleaning your personal space, moving around, being physical, not staring at the screen all day, all sorts of these little things. The simple stuff seems to be what some of the smartest people in the world struggle with, from my little anecdotal experience.
Absolutely, and it's worth noting that while I am very optimistic that the scientific breakthroughs are coming very quickly, where I think there'll be interventions within the next 10 years at the latest that could perhaps significantly extend your lifespan. The things that you can do right now are the things that your mother always told you should do. You know, sleep well, keep your stress low,
Mm.
exercise, etc. That's still the most effective. And I am one of those people that also struggle with doing it myself, running around so much.
Yeah, I remember doing research on nootropics a few years back, and one of the things that the research kept pointing towards was all of this is just optimizing. All of the data like kind of pales in comparison to just getting your 8 hours every single night. Like I remember reading a lot that indicated sleep is one of the keys to longevity, both mentally and physically. Like that's where a lot of the recovery and the restoration comes in. So like nailing that sleep cycle is a great starting point.
That actually taps into some of the particular work that I do within this like broader concept that may actually have a tie to games like Axie at some point. But this has to do with dementia remediation, actually, like Alzheimer's
Hmm.
disease, where this touches like sleep. Like, oh, why do we sleep? There's kind of been a lot of theories, but one of the things that's kind of emerging as somewhat of a consensus is that when you sleep, maybe your blood-brain barrier dilates a little bit, basically allows the cleaning mechanisms to work and, clean out the junk in your brain. So one of the things that you see with people who have Alzheimer's disease is kind of like this negative feedback loop of sleep being disrupted, which might make what I just said worse, which might further disrupt sleep. And it's kind of like this downward slide. So as important as we thought sleep was, I think it might even be more important than, yeah.
Interesting. So I'm and forgive if I open up like a rabbit hole that's not your expertise, but how does all this relate to screens? I hear a lot of stuff about blue light. Obviously, as a gamer, I spend a lot of time on screens. I've read a little bit about even reading on a physical book, like with paper versus reading on a tablet, versus the ones that are tablets, but they're sort of like the not lit with blue light. I don't know those e-readers that are somewhere in the middle, and how those affect your ability to retain information and focus. I read a really great book recently called I'm going to forget the name of it now, but Stolen Focus. That was it. Stolen Focus. I think it came out earlier this year. And it's basically about how all of us are losing our ability to focus and have deep thought. And we live in this world of constant distractions, and that's kind of what our brains are becoming more and more primed for, and how that's resulting in a net IQ loss in our average performance because we're all constantly trying to multitask. And I say that in air quotes because one of the things the book points out is that multitasking isn't really real. It's kind of an illusion, and you usually end up doing two things very inefficiently as opposed to just doing one thing much more thoroughly or efficiently or deeper or whatever else.
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in that particular neuroscience, but I would say from my personal experience, it seems to corroborate what you're saying. And what I do know is that it's certainly the case that certain frequencies of lights or even just like, the rates that lights that you have in your room might be flickering at, certain frequencies can induce like stress responses and things like that. So I don't know the particulars on like which kind of blue light might be good or bad, et cetera, or if there's true science behind that. But the general concept of how often you stare at lights and lights affecting you, frequencies affecting you is true. So it seems very plausible to me. I'll say that.
Gotcha. Understood. So, I'd love to unpack maybe some like basics for folks that are watching this right now, wondering, all right, so how does this tie into Axie? How does this tie into my lifestyle? And maybe I'll open the door by saying it feels like scholarships were called scholarships because it really is about learning. You're learning how to use the blockchain, learning how to use financial decentralized tools for the first time, learning how to play Axie, right? Maybe you're learning how to become competitive in a card game. But again, I think that's just the beginning, right? Axie, Lunacia, it's an entire universe. Origin is just but one card game of the games. We're starting to see experimentation outside of the Axie universe, like step in, rewards for people walking and all sorts of other integrations of real world into blockchain. I saw another app that ties into like your Apple Health, and it rewards you for your sleep cycle. So you get some sort of tokens or NFTs if you hit certain sleep wins, and it uses your Apple Watch, and it kind of leverages Apple's data as a middleman to kind of verify some of the data that I guess they're putting out into the blockchain universe. All very interesting stuff. And I think there is kind of an intersection, because I think of Axie as a lifestyle, Axie as a culture, right? If Axie is a movement, there's going to have to be more to it than just the digital part. But how are we taking care of ourselves as physical beings that are interfacing with the digital part? So I don't know if that's a good starting point, but to me,
Yes.
that seems to be like, like
So
we could be cooking with something there.
You're like perfectly teeing up like the things that I wanted to talk about. So absolutely
Perfect.
kicking with gas. So I would say right off the top of my mind, there's definitely two integration points with ecosystems like Axie, and I'll present the simpler one first, and then the one's more in line with what you were saying second. The simpler one is literally just as part of like the tokenomics, etc. You could have some reflections going to certain charities or whatever, which would be really cool. And especially if you can find a way to thematically, relate that, if there's, in Lunacy, if there's like, longevity lands or something like that, and any battles that are there reflect a little bit of the transaction to a charity, right? And what the reason why that might be valuable to the community is, I had mentioned this on some other podcasts that I was on. I was recently talking to the team at Engine about something similar. If you have people trying to critique, the whole endeavor of, NFTs, or they're trying to, basically poo-poo on it, right? If you can turn around and say, hey, we just raised, $100 million for cancer research, like, what are you doing? That's a really good defense against anyone who tries to, right?
I like it.
So that's a simple one. And then the more complicated one, which is probably more interesting, is what you were saying is, it would be very plausible, and I'm working actively on this, kind of trying to daisy chain a bunch of different DAOs that I've been working with together. Like one of them is called Cure DAO, which is sort of like a repository for health data, right? Like decentralized health data access, where if you could step in the sleep tracker data, etc., this system could maybe do a little bit more kind of science on that, and through an API expose it out to games like Axie. And then here's what can happen, which is exciting. You have your arena battles, right? And I'm sure your community is very passionate about trying to rank up and all that stuff, right? What would happen if the parameters of your Axies were slightly augmented by your parameters as a player? If you've slept well, the Axies have a little bit more hit points. If you've done a lot of push-ups and that's tracked in a health tracker, your Axie gets a 2% strength bonus. And especially if that allows you to become a more competitive player, where you might win stuff, that incentivizes you to take care of yourself. So you can see the
Oh,
feedback loop here, right?
yeah. Wow, that would be really cool. And it's and my brain's spinning because I just spoke at NFTNYC earlier this year, a couple months ago this summer. And when I was leaving the conference, anytime you speak on the stage and you come down, all these people want to talk to you. They want to pick your brain about whatever your topic was. And since play to earn is so hot, there were a ton of people with games and apps that had some kind of earning mechanic. And almost all of them wanted to ask me about sustainability. How do I make my economy sustainable? And one of the guys that was so determined, he actually followed me. And I said, I have to leave. I have another meeting. And he followed me to my next meeting, door to door, around Manhattan in New York City. And the thing that he was pitching was essentially step in. However, it was bikes. It was you had to ride a bike instead of walk, but same general concept. And the thing that we couldn't get over, I said, how do you do bot detection? How do you know it's not a robot just pedaling the bike and that it's actually a human pedaling the bike? Because he said, we have special hardware you have to buy. And he kind of looked up and said, well, that is one of the hardest parts. I mean, we can look at some things where if it's too regular, humans have irregularities, and we do have some basic bot detection, but you're right. I mean, it's not really that hard to write a script that has some variants built in, and it's just a robot pedaling in circles. Same with stepping. You put your phone on your dog and let it go run around the backyard, and you're getting a whole bunch of steps. The concept is amazing, like the framework, but how do we verify the data that's going into the system? That's the part that right now we're still a little hung up on. And I'd be
Yeah.
curious your thought about how we go about I mean, obviously, like a neural link or something is a great solution, but still a little ways off that one from everything I've gathered.
Yeah, I'm going to come out with a somewhat bold statement here, where I actually think technologically that problem is super easy to solve. It's
Really?
more about the how do you make everybody comfortable with the solutions, right?
Ah, okay.
So part of
Adoption.
my work, this is where all of the worlds that I've been engaged in. I mentioned, my day job. I mentioned the charity, and also a bunch of DAOs. This is the area where they all converge. Because as an example, I guess it's now a DAO that I work with is called Gitcoin. I'm not sure if your community is familiar with this. They do this kind of fundraising called quadratic funding that's based off of some ideas that Vitalik had put forth. Very basically great philanthropic fundraising. But one of the things, like the way that it works is if you have a crowdfunding campaign and there's a couple of projects on it, right? The way it works is if you had a project that raised if both projects raised $1,000, but one of them raised that $1,000 from one person donating $1,000, and the other project was $1,001, the one with a lot of people will pull a lot more money out of this matching pool because it's showing that a lot, not just more money is going into it, but more people care about it, right? So where this is going to tie in, which you could probably anticipate, is obviously what such a system has to worry about is people gaming that by making 20 wallets and hitting, it's called a Sybil attack, right?
Yep.
So you have to deal with that. So one of the areas that we're talking about has to do with Sybil resistance. And here's where the technologies that I work on are squarely related to this. Because if you have great physiological biomarker tracking that can detect your face, your iPhone does this, right? When you log into your iPhone, it does your face.
Yep.
But I think the statistics were that's maybe like unique in 1 in 10,000 people, right? But what if you tied that with your face, your voice, your thumbprint, all at the same time? Now you're quickly going into like statistical impossibility of someone duping you. And then it's all about structuring that, right? You know, obviously you have to do it like as you create a new wallet, those 3 things are checked, and then it will check if another profile like that already exists, etc. So that's one way to solve the problem technologically, but then you cross over into the privacy issues, right? You know, does that mean Big Brother can track you? How do you mitigate that? And then here's where you go into, I don't know how many rabbit holes we want to go into, but here's where like zero knowledge proofs come in. So my point is that it's a solvable problem. People are thinking about it, and it would solve the issues that you're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And I like that framing a lot because you're right. Obviously, if everyone agreed to a very high degree of like KYC with thumbprints and all that, and we could, you know, verify through some system that it's people submitting their own data and it's, you know, actually valid, totally, 100%. But you're right. That goes against the ethos of what a lot of core blockchain users believe in. And kind of the reason they're here is this anti-authoritarian distrust of things centralized, even if a zero knowledge proof is intended to not, you know, be seen or unpacked by anyone. There's always the skepticism of what's unhackable now could be hackable in the future, and putting all that data in one place, regardless, you know, starts to become a little bit of a Pandora's box. So that part I still haven't figured out how to solve, like how to build a system that is at sort of that Bitcoin level of trustless that humans that are even skeptical of that level of centralization would still say, you know what, it's worth it. Here's my fingerprint. I trust this. Insert whatever this godly system is that gets all these humans to try. I'm almost scared of the religious nature of such a system, if that's not a stretch to say.
Yeah, that reminds me of the game Deus Ex, if anyone's familiar with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did get into a rabbit hole there. What led us in this direction? I've now lost my train of thought thinking about
I think it was just
KYC and user verification, because it's really a thing for esports for us as well. We've been having similar Sybil thoughts about we really don't want users to be able to claim multiple prize pools within the esports ecosystem. So it's figuring out how do we apply KYC for certain competitions, but also make it fair. You know, we've also had, what if somebody wanted to play in a tournament and be anonymous and walk on stage with a mask on? Would we allow that? And I think the answer is no, because it just seems a little bit too have your cake and eat it too. Like, if you want to participate in esports, great, but you got to be on the stage like the rest of us. And if you don't want to, then no worries. Feel free to play in the arena. But I guess all that is to say that the privacy issue has a lot of ripple effects in the Web3 space. And even with something like gaming, which is, quote, for fun, it very quickly becomes a job when there's enough money on the line. Competitions get really serious. And yeah, all this knowing who you're doing business with starts to matter a lot in certain situations.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure exactly what I can speak about, but you've probably seen a lot of videos on YouTube, for example, that there's a lot of issues right now, which is NFTs in general, of if you're a big company and you want to have like a relationship with your customer, right? You know, if that person buys the NFT from OpenSea, right? You know, maybe OpenSea can throw up some kind of, you know, agreement or something like that. But then once the person has it and sells it to their friend or whatever, any of that is lost, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people kind of ideating on that issue, and I think we'll see some solves for that, and that's part of the equation of allowing we need to have a world in which organizations can have a relationship with anonymous individuals, right? And I think there are ways that's going to emerge.
Yes.
So
You're definitely right that a lot of different entities will benefit from it, and it does seem like when there is a collective interest in something getting solved, that's when the human spirit really comes in full force, and solutions tend to be found. We went down this rabbit hole talking about Steppen and these other apps, and I think I might have framed it by saying the concept is really good, though. You know, I think the idea of rewarding people for good behaviors, you know, the very same concept that started play to earn. It's like, what are we doing here? We have a token that has intrinsic value because it's used in the ecosystem for a core function, breeding, and as a reward for gameplay. And what is the reward? Winning arenas. Why is that good? Well, because as a competitive game, we need player liquidity. We need people to queue up in the arena to be a challenge for other people that want to queue up in the arena. The number one thing that ruins competitive games is not having enough players, because it's not fun to play against people that aren't at your skill level. So we can kind of extend that same incentives framework to say, hey, if the goal here is to maximize user health for our users to be, you know, happy and healthy and be here as long as possible, then how can we incentivize financially the behaviors that match that, be it moving or eating the right foods or whatever else? And you can start to almost visualize a web where if we all have smart refrigerators and we're all scanning the food that we put in, you could see a world where you could actually have like an eat to earn kind of app where you're rewarding people based on, you know, cooking the right foods or using the right ingredients or avoiding certain ingredients or whatever else things. I mean,
people spend hours on like the Zelda cooking mini games, so why not, right?
there you go. I mean, there's so much gamification like that we don't even realize. I think there are a lot of gamers out there that don't realize they're addicted to economy games because there's other layers to it. But almost every popular game has some sort of economy element where you get a resource and then you trade that resource for other resources, and it's scarce in this angle, and you know, all these kind of things. That's kind of what makes it fun. That scarcity.
Yeah, so totally on target. And one of the things I've been sort of, you know, brainstorming with Jiho, and I would love to see the next version of Axie incorporate any of these ideas. But to your question about concerns of like KYC, the good news is I think there's probably something really interesting that we could already do in a game like Axie with just step and sleep data. That's it. You know, and I don't think that's enough to, you know, deduce someone's identity from, right? So I think
Yeah.
the middle ground here, I think. And I want to mention an idea that I want to get your thoughts on, like what this might look like as another eventual game mode, perhaps for Axie Infinity. So right now you have, you know, the battles and the tournaments. What I would really love to see, and I have like complex wireframes about it. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with, I imagine your community is, with roguelike games, you know, like Slay the Spire, etc. Right? And it would be really cool to have almost like a dungeon mode, you know, in Axie Infinity, where the way that this could tie in to what I'm working on is there was this old contest. This is probably too old for most of your audience. In Atari, they had this game called Swordquest, and they did this amazing contest that was sort of the basis for the movie Ready Player One, if you've seen that, where everyone was competing to win this like super hard Atari game. And if you won, you got this cryptographic code, and you'd call into the Atari headquarters and like give them the code. And then they like flew out the 8 winners to the Atari headquarters to compete in like a televised contest, and the winner was supposed to win like this $1 million jewel encrusted sword, which is amazing. And everybody lost their minds over it, right? So I would love to see a super hard dungeon game like that, with NFTs as the items and stuff, that everyone's trying to compete to win. And of course, maybe it's incremental. You know, maybe you don't have to win the full game to get some rewards. You go down level by level. But if you do win, you win some amazing prize. And some of that could be reflected to charity. And what makes it really cool is, I'm not sure, have you ever heard of the fable of the dragon tyrant, Zyori?
No. Fable of the Dragon Tyrant. I don't think so.
Yeah, if your audience or you, if you go to, I believe it's still there, if you go to Vitalik Buterin's Twitter, it'll be like right there on like his main thing. Like, check this out, Fable of the Dragon Tyrant. And it's a story that this philosopher Nick Bostrom has kind of put forth. It's like a metaphor for aging, where if you consider aging as if it was a dragon in like an ancient story, but then you tell like a parable, it's clear to you that the dragon is bad. So why aren't we working on that? So I would love to create a game mode that's like the Dragon Tyrant, where you're doing this to fight the Dragon Tyrant, but then you're reflecting some money by doing that for the people who are fighting the dragon tyrant in real life. So it's like the game and the real world come together, right?
Uh-huh. I love that. So as you were explaining that, I typed Swordquest into Google, and I'm like blown away right now, man. I can't believe I've never heard of this before. I'm gonna have to watch some YouTube videos. It crosses mediums where you're right. They released 3 different video games: Earth World, Fire World, Water World, and they had planned a 4th game called Air World. And each of the games came with a comic book that explained the plot, and each plot had part of the solution to this big puzzle to win the contest. And then I think it says here in Wikipedia, $150,000 was the prize, which in 1979, I mean, that's like that's crazy video game money, you know. So I'm sure people were like losing their minds to go like figure this out. Wow.
Interesting postscript to that story too.
Okay.
You mentioned there was supposed to be a 4th game. It's because this happened right when the video game crash happened in 1982 or 83, that whole thing with like the ET cartridges and buried in the desert, right? So they never finished this. And here's the fun fact. Nobody knows what happened to the sword. I want that sword.
Wow. So do we know the sword was made? That's confirmed?
Yeah, because there were these events where they were showcasing them. So people think like, you know, the guy who owned Atari might have it, or Nolan Bushnell might have it, etc. So that's one of my like low-key little secret desires, is if we can do this Dragon Tyrant game, if maybe we can get that sword to be one of the prizes for the winner. That would be a great way to tie the past and the present and the future together.
So just to go full circle on this thing while we're here, apparently June 29, 2022, Atari announced as a plan of the Atari 50, the anniversary celebration collection, that the Digital Eclipse team had created the 4th and final entry to the Swordquest series, Air World, and it will be available for PlayStation 5, Xbox, PS4, and Nintendo Switch, as well as PC in winter of 2022.
That's amazing.
Wow. So there you go. It's coming back. That's
that was an unintentionally timely reference.
So who knows? Maybe we will get a conclusion to the story. But no, I think about this stuff all the time. Like, how do we take Axie to the next level? You know, what's the level up? During the bull market last year, we used to talk about Axie Town. You know, let's say that we get to 100 million daily active users at some point. That's a lot of users, but like where do we go? Like once we disrupt digital, it kind of comes back to physical. We've got to plug in somewhere. We've got a game somewhere. And I always used to say, if Axie Town is going to exist, you bet your ass it's going to have a doctor and a school, you know, because for Axie Town to thrive, it's got to have some path for children, and children need education. And the more people there are, well, people have health problems. And then all of a sudden, we just got a little society. But when you really start thinking about it from okay, what do we need to thrive as a community? If we were on an Axie desert island and we could bring a list of supplies, what do we need to live? Healthcare really becomes pretty high on the priority list, and education is shortly after. You realize real fast that it has to be family friendly if you really want it to scale.
Absolutely, and this could tie into like, you know, land mechanics as well. So again, maybe we'll sync up offline on this, because again, I have schematics on all this stuff. But there's another series of games that was very popular back in the day and still kind of going, called the Wizardry series, and it was sort of the first Western RPG series that had, and also had this concept of a hub town, right? That a lot of modern games still have, right? A lot of roguelikes have. You know, you have your base, you know, your blacksmith and your this and that, right? And you could see how that could factor perfectly in to the ideas that we were just talking about, right? Maybe you know, you prepare for your venture into the Dragon Tyrant's lair at a town where, you know, you can sequester some of your items, or here's when, you know, you have the scholarship program, or where people can lend their Axies, right? Maybe that's phrased in the sense of a town. You know, you have a tavern where, you know, your Axies come and go when they're lent to other people, right? So you can really kind of make this more communal. So I think there's a lot of potential opportunities here that we could talk about. But I also wanted to switch topics a little bit.
Sure.
Just to mention, you know, we had started the conversation with aging, and we kind of pivoted to just kind of healthcare generally. So I just kind of want to mention, in case it's unfamiliar to your audience, like, what do those things have to do with each other, or, you know, what's the novelty here? So something that's happened in the past 10 years is, while people have been trying to address the root causes of aging since, ancient times, and doing all kinds of crazy snake oil stuff like, drinking mercury and things like that didn't work out so well.
The tonic era, right?
Yes, yes. Within the past 10 years, there's this framework that's sort of emerged called the Hallmarks of Aging, which basically says, I'm summing up here, that while the kinds of diseases that you can get throughout your life are myriad, there's really only like a pretty small subset of types of damage that you accumulate throughout your life that kind of cause all those pathologies. So, DNA damage, junk building up in your cells, junk building up between your cells, right? So once this framework has kind of emerged, it's really painted these targets for specific interventions. So one of them that's a fun, easy one to understand is there's this concept of senescent cells. As you get older, you sort of build up this burden of cells in your body that essentially become zombies. It's a really good analogy because they don't die, but they don't function like a normal living cell, and they kind of infect their neighbors to become zombies too. And you just kind of slowly build up this burden of them throughout your life. So now there's this new class of therapies called senolytics. Lysis means cut. So it basically means destroys those cells, because they're supposed to kind of suicide themselves, but when you get older, they don't. So this is just a good example of something that's happening kind of right now that's really moving the needle. And if you think of aging and diseases like a tree, what makes more sense kind of societally, like spending billions of dollars on curing like some end stage cancer, or addressing genetic instability, which causes all cancers or most of them, and a lot of things like that. So it's kind of this paradigm shift that's happening of like, let's try to treat the trunk of the tree and get all the branches at the same time. Does that make sense?
No, totally. I mean, I use that analogy a lot in project management. Like, guys, we're spending a lot of resources treating a symptom right now, and we need to just sort of accept that that symptom exists because of a root cause, and spend the bulk of the resources chipping away at the root, and then figuring out how to stop the problem to begin with. Then the symptom will go away. So I understand that perfectly. Actually, that makes great sense. Are there any like I'm sure people like yourself hate the quick tip questions, but I'd love if there are any sort of like, kind of basic things. I mean, what you just described is really interesting, and I'm curious if there's anything else like that that we could unpack, because I'm really curious about what other parts like. That sounds so futuristic, but you just said that's now, right? That's sort of modern. That's where we're at right now on this current paradigm shift of understanding some of these key markers that are root causes of these things, right? That's
Yeah.
not theoretical. That's
Yeah.
science today.
So I can give you sort of like a where we are now, what's probably going to happen in the next 5 years, and then what's further off, right?
Cool. No, that's awesome.
And I'll try to keep it pretty like high level. But conceptually, I think a lot of it makes sense. Like, people understand zombies, right? So that last one was okay.
Yeah.
I was on a news program, talking about this, and the person asked me if you have to hit the cells between the eyes, and I was like, yeah. So basically, as I mentioned, like right now, of course, do the things that your mother told you to do, right? That's still the most effective thing. But one of the interventions that's emerged, that's something people could do right now, although most people might not want to do it, is calorie restriction, eating less than you need to, right? Like 70% calorie restriction, or 30% restriction, 7% total, because that has shown that it kind of affects your metabolism in some ways that like slows your accumulation of damage. Now, most people don't want to do that because they love food. I am one of them, right? So one of the things that's happening right now that's like a near-term intervention is basically called calorie restriction mimetics. These supplements, in a sense, that mimic that effect without you having to restrict your calories. An example here is NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide. So just NMN if you want to Google it. And there are a lot of people kind of hawking their own special brands here. So I want to be clear, like I don't want to come off as shilly in any way. Do your own research, right? But if you're curious, Google calorie restriction mimetics. And there are other drugs like the diabetes drug metformin that showed very interesting results in the past, where people who have diabetes tend to live a little bit shorter in terms of lifespan than an average person. But there's this diabetes drug, metformin, that's been used for like 50 years. And just because of that so much data, it was noticed that the people who had diabetes but were taking metformin on average lived a little bit longer than a normal person. So then the question becomes, well, what happens if you take normal people and give them metformin. Does that increase their life expectancy? So this is an example of a trial that's like imminently about to happen.
I see.
And I don't think this is going to make you live 30 years longer, right? This would be at the margins, maybe 2 or 3 years, etc. But that's like kind of what's happening now. At the next stage, which is maybe 5 to 10 years, are things like the zombie cell stuff I was talking about. And there's this one that's very popular right now called epigenetic reprogramming. So you might have seen in the news people like Jeff Bezos are throwing money behind it with the company called Outtro, where like $3 billion was just allocated to this kind of research. This is what we're talking about, which is if you have your genetic code, epigenetics are like modifications that happen to that code, like little nodules that sit on top of the DNA and like overexpress or underexpress them. And this can change throughout your life, right? So there's these therapies that are able to, I'm just being very nice, very glib here by saying, let's just say there's a kind of change that is bad that you build up in your life. Epigenetic programming might be hitting your cells with a certain kind of medicine that reverses those particular changes. Does that make sense?
I think
Yeah.
so. On a high level, it basically sounds like it finds bad stuff in your cells and turns it into good stuff. So yeah, that sounds great. Get rid of
And
my
then,
bad and give me the good, please.
yeah. And then in the farther future, and this is where it goes a little bit into what sounds more fantastical. You have like your nano machines infused in your body doing things and stuff like that, which I do think is totally plausible, but I generally don't talk about that stuff because I try to
Pretty far off, yeah.
yeah, from my own tactics, I try to put things in terms of like, let's get there first, and then that part, and then that part, so people will take you seriously.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a rabbit hole that maybe we could talk about offline sometime. But I'm super fascinated with gut health and the connection of gut health with mental health. I think we've got a lot of things wrong right now, and over the next 50 years, like the medicine around gut health is completely going to change. I think really this more customized kind of a model and understanding that we're all individuals and we all have a unique gut biome is really going to be a key part of understanding why all of our guts operate so completely differently. And a lot of these, I was diagnosed with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, as a child. And as an adult, I went to a good modern gut specialist who she immediately face palmed and went, yeah, we don't really do IBS anymore. That's like not really that much of a thing. It was sort of one of those diagnoses back in the day for there's something wrong with his stomach. We don't really know what it is. So good luck to you there, son. Avoid those foods that seem to give you an upset tummy. And she's like, we've kind of evolved past that, but we also haven't really because this stuff is still like really complicated and the cutting edge science is still emerging. But I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of aspects like that about the body that we really take for granted and are just so much more complex than we can even really describe right now.
Well, this crosses over right into the area where blockchain and decentralized science can really help in sort of structuring
You're going to
these.
decentralize my gut? Is that what we're doing here, Keith?
Yes,
Please.
I want my gut to become your gut. No, just kidding. Although there are such things as like transplants, but we don't have
I've
to get
heard
into
of, yeah, it's
Yeah.
true.
But I'll give you an example of something that I'm working on personally. So I had mentioned dementia remediation earlier, right? So there's this work that it's going to sound fantastical, but just take my word for it. It's turning out that maybe literally flickering lights and sounds at certain frequencies might reverse the symptoms of dementia. It certainly does it in mice. It's an open question of whether it does it in humans, right? So
Wow.
what I'm working on with the various DAOs that I've mentioned and could be amazing is you could structure basically a decentralized clinical trial where just from your laptop, you could have these therapies applied to you from things that could be picked up based on your webcam. Data could be contributed back. So you're getting this therapy applied to you. You could be incentivized with some cryptocurrency by doing that. Um, lead to a publication. So it's basically a complete flip of the current healthcare model. Instead of spending tons of money for dementia therapies that haven't worked for 30 years, it's like we'll pay you for therapies that will work. And this is going to sound a little bit funny or fantastical. It's not crazy to think some element of this could find its way into games like Axie. Because when we're talking about flickering lights here, your regular light bulb is flickering at 50 hertz here. The kinds of therapies we're talking about is like 40 hertz flickering, for example. So literally the game could have a little bit of a
It could be
audio or
subliminal,
visual effects.
like built
Yeah.
into it.
Now you have to
Wow.
dodge things like epilepsy, et cetera. So there's concerns
Sure.
there, but yeah.
So that's fascinating, though. And this is a little bit meta, but I think people can wrap their brain around it. when you're talking about healthcare, right, from a systems level, like we're minister of health for a whole country. How do we maximize the quality of healthcare for our people, but spend as little money as possible while maximizing the quality? That's like kind of the forever conundrum that the government is trying to solve, right? So we're talking about a system where it could theoretically be worth it to pay people to do these daily exercises or frequency training or therapy or whatever it is, if that reduces the chances in aggregate that people get dementia or bad brain problems, because it's very expensive on the system to treat people once they have those disorders. So we could pay people 10% ahead of time in like a preventative medicine kind of a thing. So at the end of the system, it's cheaper for the government, and the person is more likely to be healthy at the end because they're just reducing the chances that they get dementia. So it's like, goes back to what we were saying. You're truly focusing on the root cause rather than spending more to treat the symptom.
You are 100% correct. So you're really on this. I don't know, why you seem to be anticipating all of my points, but this ties to a concept called the longevity dividend, right? Which is becoming more and more important because there's this demographic change that is happening. It's called sometimes the silver tsunami. I'm not sure if that's the most culturally appropriate term to use, but that's what it was once called. Basically, the birth rates are dropping in a lot of countries, and the elderly are living longer in sick health. So you can see that any system like Medicare for all or any kind of socialized healthcare or just general government healthcare is going to really be strained by that. And is already being strained in some countries, right? Singapore, et cetera, right? And not coincidentally, those countries are the ones that are kind of leading the way on aging research because they need to, honestly, right? Yeah. But to your point, there's a lot of convincing economic work out there. I think Andrew Scott is an economist if people want to Google his name to find out this work, longevity dividend. And the economics behind it are staggering, even if you make very, very conservative estimates. Like if we're able to reduce, slow down, forget about reversing, even just slowing down the onset of some of these diseases by 20%, it's like $7.1 trillion to the US economy in 10 years or so. I forget the specifics, but it's something that's like ridiculously gargantuan. So now one of the organizations that I work with, I normally work with a 501c3, but we spun out, or, not exactly a spin out, but we helped a 501c4 organization in the US, which is a lobbying organization, specifically to lobby Congress people on this, to reallocate the healthcare budget to prioritize this.
So yeah. But to circle back to where we were, the fundamental issue that I thought existed is the KYC, right? How do we get people to adhere to a system where we know it's them, we know their identity, it's Sybil resistant, and we can verify they're actually doing the actions we want to reward them for? If you're talking about like a government system in the terms of healthcare, that's actually a little easier because the government knows who you are, right? The government does have KYC. They know their customer because you were freaking born here. They gave you that stamp when you came out. So they already have all of your info, whether you like it or not, whether you can trust them or not, they already got it. So that is sort of a weird incentive structure where the government could actually take lead on like a health to earn type platform where they're literally paying you even just USDC. I mean, it doesn't even have to be crypto at that point. It could just be dollars, but the crypto rails make it even more efficient where they're sending you crypto to do these healthcare things, and they can prove with numbers, with math, like a president could come out at the State of the Union and say, look, we've projected that we've saved X billions in healthcare with this, Y billions investment here. I mean,
absolutely.
My brain's really spinning right now, man. Maybe this isn't as far away as I thought.
Yeah, and if you think about it, like a sloppy non-Web3 version of this kind of stuff has been attempted in various forms for years. Things like a sin tax, right? Like you got to pay extra if you're smoking cigarettes, et cetera, or an extra tax, right? No, that's obviously much less sophisticated than what we're talking about here. But
that's like a disincentive, right? We're talking about something that feels more like a positive incentive instead of a punishment.
Yeah, and you're seeing things like, I forget which country has this, but like, if you don't have money for a Metro card or whatever, you do the squats in front of the machine and then you get the Metro card, right?
I like that. No, that's very clever, actually. That seems like a joke, but that's actually, I bet you can put metrics behind that being a very effective automated system, because it is automated in nature, right? It doesn't take any human element, and you're just making somebody work out, and you're
Yeah,
still
it's the
yeah
benefit of smart contracts, right? You have
yeah
everything automatic and nice.
wow. And then once we have that, it really doesn't seem that far fetched, like you said, to see a system like a health to earn that has some buy-in integrate with a game like Axie that has the audience and the engagement. And there's now a link kind of with the KYC where, again, the government knows who you are anyway. And if you can put a game layer on it, it gets people really excited about these actions. If it has a meaningful impact, even if it's a small amount, like you said, my Axie has 2% more hit points because I did my push-ups today. That will have an effect. There will be hundreds,
Yeah,
thousands, tens of thousands of players that do those push-ups because they want that little edge in the arena.
it would
100%.
absolutely work on me because I'm one of those people that like it's kind of dangerous. Like I'm like super completionist person, which is very bad if you have a lot to do. So like anytime there's a game like Skyrim or something like that, I'll spend like literally like 100 hours like on the facial thing because I want it to be like just right. And it's like if I'm spending time on that, I would definitely spend time on this. Like
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Wow, that was such a great thing to stumble into, because the last question I wanted to ask you was actually about the psychology of preventative medicine. I was thinking about it more on the angle of like RSI, repetitive stress injuries. As someone that's worked in esports, pro gamer, I've seen a lot of injuries in my day. I have seen pro gamers come and go, folks with permanent injuries that started as a joke, then evolved into an inconvenience, then became a major issue, and then eventually became I'm retiring at age 30 because my hands don't move so good anymore. And I hear the same cigarette arguments for the keyboard stuff. Well, I've been doing this for 10 years and I feel fine. And I always use that cigarette analogy. Like you'd smoke a pack a day for 10 years and say, I feel fine. Cigarettes are just fine. And we all know that's not a true statement. You have to think of the keyboard and mouse the same way. You have to take this seriously, guys. Hunching over the key, like once you're starting to feel it, you're already in danger territory. If you ignore what you're feeling, you're walking a tightrope to like real damage. Once you're waking up every day in pain and still not dealing with it, you're like seriously starting to talk about potentially serious damage.
Mm.
And even with mobile devices, I have conversations with people all the time about scholar's neck. With mobile devices, it's hard because you're either up here and your neck is okay, or you put it, and your hands hurt, or you put it down and your hands are okay, but then your neck is down. There isn't really a perfect way to hold a phone for a really long gaming session, for like a 4-hour gaming session. That's not really what phones were made for. And now we're starting to see that crossover. So, sorry, now I'm just rambling about one of my things that I'm passionate about. I've got at NFTNYC, I got into a fight with one of my long-term friends who works in mobile gaming, and he said, I've been with pro gamers for 5 years and they haven't reported any pain. And I don't think ergonomics for mobile is worse than computers. I said, man, 5 years isn't a long enough time horizon. Seriously, please take heed. They're pro gamers. They're incentivized to be tough. You put money in front of them, they're going to say they're fine until like the day they're not fine. So anyway, I think you touched on a lot of it there, but there does seem to be something. I mean, I went through it myself. I have permanent back pain now from hunching over and sitting crooked and not dealing with it. How do
Well,
we get people to take preventative care seriously?
well, again, amazing, accidental, perfect segue, man. You're on it. Basically, another area of the work that I've done has to do with biomarkers, right? And there's a preventative component of that as well. Even with things like the pandemic, you can detect early warnings of these things in your physiological metrics. Your even things like heat stress, right? If you're going to have heat stroke before you actually collapse, things in your walking gait might change a little bit. You might have a little bit of a twitch in your arm, right? So I actually I've never thought about this as another value proposition to the gaming community, where a system that we're talking about here could potentially serve as an early warning diagnostic for when you are entering into those potentially dangerous territories, right? So that's actually really, really good point. I'm gonna noodle on that and do some work and get back to you. And another area on sort of the gamer psychology and taking care of your customers in a sense, or whatever we call the community members. Um, if you think of games like Candy Crush, right? They have these mechanics that are built into them, like the energy mechanics, right? Ostensibly to make it so you don't overplay and burn yourself out. But if we're being honest with ourselves, there's a little bit of a profiteering mechanic in there as well, because you can pay to get through those, right?
Right.
And that can exploit certain addictive behaviors, right? But what if the way to get through those was not paying, but by proving that you are healthy, by doing sit-ups, by doing this and that? So you get the original stated benefit of trying to take care of your players in a very real way that's not like exploiting them for cash, right?
Yeah.
So it could create a more holistic gaming ecosystem, which I think could be nice.
I like that. I had a thought maybe 6 months ago where I wondered similar lines of what we're discussing now. If we could incentivize our community to be healthy, and if we could somehow get our community to move more, work out more, learn more, is it possible to create not just a very robust, supportive, like progressive community, but one that's actually a little bit more insulated from scams and misinformation, like a community that's in general better at critical thinking. And like if you feel better, it's easier to think better. I really believe in some of that, like, feeling good is good. If you can get yourself to feel good physically and take care of yourself, it makes it easier to be in a good mind state and, have positive mental energy. And it's just all the harder to be positive when your back hurts or your fingers hurt or your leg hurts or, whatever your issue is. We're still steps away from that, but I do try to think about what are simple ways we can start to socially reward these kind of activities. Like I think at Axie Con, we are planning on trying to build a little bit of physical activity into the programming. Like I wanted to do a 5K at the beginning of the first day, and I wanted to have the line like, you can walk it or you can jog it, but I'm finishing this thing. You can jog it with Jiho or you can walk it with Zyori. Those are your two options, but we're moving 5 kilometers today. And then I wanted to do on day 2, like, a beginner yoga session. Like, hey guys, let's just wake up and stretch before this day starts. Let's go outside the venue and let's open it up a little bit. Let's get these arms back. Let's stretch those hammies. Let's find some muscles that we've forgotten about, And then day 3, I wanted to do like a beginner's sort of meditation type thing. Like let's just sit and relax and clear our minds and try to not think about the stress and the chaos of competition or the conference or our lives or our travels. Let's just sit and exist for 30 minutes in space together. And to me, those are really, really small, basic things that I want to experiment with. And I think they're on the programming. I'm pretty sure very few people are going to show up to any of those 3 things, but I'm excited to be there at all of them. And those 3 people that show up, I'm excited to high five and hug those folks because I think they're the ones that are going to start to get it. And I want to believe that we can start a little bit of positive peer pressure and social pressure by making these experiences fun, accessible, and showing that there's a tangible benefit at the end of the finish line. Maybe I'm being a little philosophical here, but that was definitely one of my dreams for the upcoming Axie Con.
To add to that, positive social pressure. I used to teach hatha yoga and tai chi for many years, many moons ago when I had time. So maybe we could team up on this. But what I would say also, obviously you want to be present and mindful in the moment, but if you meditate, even if you just take a couple of deep breaths, that's going to improve your flow state, which is going to improve your gaming ability. So I think it's there's every reason in the world to do what you're suggesting.
Yeah. Just to find the right way to, just like the burning mechanisms, they've got to be worked into the game loop. We got to find a way to not just make it hey, wake up early with your hangover brain and come meditate with us, but really make that part of the game loop. If I were in charge, I wouldn't be opposed to doing a little meditation session as part of the official programming in the middle of the day. Not super sexy, not the normal content you'd see on Twitch, but personally, I think this is the kind of stuff that we should really start considering to move the needle forward, really to build a community that is, how do you say it? Like kind of has these constant mechanisms to try to make sure the community is self-regulating, taking care of itself. How do we make sure the community is taking cleansing breaths at large? Maybe that's a good way to kind of frame it from a high level. Rest
Absolutely.
and relax. Keith, this was a wild conversation. I can't believe it's been almost an hour. We covered so many things. For those that made it all the way through this, I mean, this was amazing. I feel a little disorganized, so my apologies. I feel like I should have had maybe a better flow for the dense topics we had, but I'm also glad that we were able to just dive in and uncover so much cool stuff, because you got my brain spinning like a mile a minute right now, and I feel like I owe that. The step in bicycle guy an apology. I told him we were really far off from solving these things, and you've made me feel like we're right at the tip of the iceberg, and we're so close to solving so many of these big problems. So thank
Yeah.
you for keeping me humble and opening my eyes to some of the possibilities, man. I think this is really, really interesting stuff to continue exploring.
Absolutely, and as a message, to the Axie Tuesdays community, if you are interested in seeing any of the stuff that we're talking about making its way into Axie, feel free to message Zyori or Jiho. I am very serious about wanting to work with you guys on any of this. So if the community wants to see it, I'd love to make it happen.
Yeah, you
If
got any socials for us, like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, anything like that?
Absolutely. So we're Lifespan.io on all socials. Lifespan.io is our website. If you want to help us, we have lifespan.io/crypto. An NFT project that we're working on now that's not quite the full vision of what we're talking about, but is doing some cool things like having the characters age over time. And then if you like donate or take some actions, it'll reverse that aging. You can go to lifespanlegends.com. And we have Discord. If you basically search for lifespan.io or lifespan.io on any social, you'll find us. Another flagship that I realized we completely forgot to mention is we also run the Life Noggin YouTube channel, which is a kind of massive science education YouTube channel that you audience may have seen before, with like these cool blocky animations. So you can, be educated in that way. But yeah, we need help. We especially are looking for, people who are blockchain technology savvy to become part of our community. And also, one of the perils of the modern age, which you probably are on board with as well, unfortunately, Zyori, is I am online on every social media at all times, always. so if you send me a message somewhere, I will get it. So reach out. Let's be
Cool.
friends.
Yeah, well, definitely check the YouTube description. You'll be able to find all the stuff there. Lifespan.io. This is super cool, and I hope we've got some folks in our community that have wheels turning at a similar pace to mine are right now, that are rapidly Googling, trying to figure out how they can reach out and be a part. Keith, man, seriously, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and hope we can do this again. If you're going to be in Barcelona, excited to meet you, and if not, we got to get you to an Axie meetup one of these days, so that we can hang out and at the very least get you some of that Axie merch.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Sweet. Take care, man.
Take care.